Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the World Water Week 2024. Before we start, I'd like to point out some housekeeping rules. There's a lot of us in the room. The emergency exits are at the back. There are 2 of them. If you hear the alarms, please make your way to the back and collect the fire point outside of the hotel. The second point that I hope I don't need to say, but I will say, please keep your phones on silent out of respect for the speakers on stage. With that, welcome to Center Stage. With me on stage, I have Suzanne Halling-Duffy, Director of the World Water Week, and Andreas Carlson, Communications Director of CIVI.
Thank you, Artie, and welcome everyone who's here with us in Stockholm and online around the world. Welcome to this year's World Water Week. Last year, we had almost every single country represented, which really speaks volumes to the importance and the relevance of the issues discussed during the week.
And this diversity that you all represent is a key feature of World Water Week. Because in the end of the day, the conversations that will happen here, the solutions, the actions that will take shape, will only be as good and as far-reaching as the people behind them. So thank you for joining us. It's important that you do, and we are very happy to have you here. Now, Susanne, this year World Water Week builds on the theme Bridging Borders, Water for a Peaceful and Sustainable Future.
Yes, it does. And there are many borders to be bridged, not just geographical between countries and regions, but also between sectors, generations, and different parts of the water cycle. This year's theme asks us to recognize this interconnectivity and really highlights the collaborative efforts that are needed to create positive change.
I think you will all agree that collaboration is crucial. We can all do our part, but we will not succeed if we all work in silos. And World Water Week is very much representing precisely that. And the event itself should not be seen in isolation. World Water Week is an integrated part of the global water agenda. This is where we build on existing knowledge and experience, amplify, develop further, and then act as a springboard for future conversations and actions.
And CIVI has made this commitment to the Water Action Agenda, and we offer World Water Week as the arena to accelerate change through capacity building and bringing people together, like we're doing today and this week, for the benefit of water security.
And here you are, here in Stockholm and online around the world, truly global community coming together across borders to find solutions through water for a peaceful and sustainable future. A future where water is valued, where safe water is readily available, where water in all its forms is respected and managed and used responsibly. So again, it's lovely to have you here and have a fun and productive week.
Before we proceed with the week, we would like to take the opportunity to honor 2 CIVI colleagues who we unfortunately lost since World Water Week last year. In December 2023, CIVI's senior advisor and one of the organization's initiators, Professor Malin Falkenmark, passed away.
And in May this year, we lost our colleague Kasonde Molenga, who worked at CIVI's then office in Pretoria, South Africa. Malin, Kasonde were both in their respective ways true water champions. They are sorely missed by us at CIVI and the water community. Please join us in acknowledging them and their work with a round of applause. Thank you. Back to you, Artie.
Thank you, Andreas, Suzanne. So my name is Artie Davis, and I will walk you through today's opening ceremony. You will hear a number of speakers taking us through their journeys of inclusive dialogue and decision-making for water. Before we start that, our first speaker will welcome you to Stockholm and welcome you to the World Water Week. I invite on stage Mr. Ole Borrell, the chairman of the Stockholm Water Council and the chairman of Civi, to share with us a few words.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the city of Stockholm. We are so many people here at Waterfront, right next to the iconic City Hall and the Lake Mälaren glimmering in the sunshine. The reason we gather here at the World Water Week is not primarily that Stockholm is beautiful, or not even that it's always nice to see old friends or meet new ones. It's because of the theme, which goes also for our thousands of online participants. The theme that we will hear many times this week: bridging borders, water for a peaceful and sustainable future. What could be more relevant in our times than to focus and to network around this theme? We in this room, we understand how everything on Earth is interconnected. Individuals and families, families and local communities and nations, nations and regions, regions and continents, continents and the whole globe. And with the technology of our time, I think I must mention also the universe. We are going out there in the space. And we are all dependent on each other. And it's only together that we can solve the big challenges that humanity is facing. Science and education, civil society organizations and NGOs, municipalities, states and international associations, socially responsible private companies. We are all cornerstones, the 4 cornerstones in the future we want to build for our children and grandchildren. That's our vision, and it is our duty. Among us here, we have Professor Taikan Oki, the laureate of Stockholm Water Prize 2024. It's such a great honor for us to greet you here today. You've been here before, but now you're back in Stockholm. And we look forward to the event, Meet the Laureate, tomorrow, and to the moment when His Majesty the King presents the prize to you in the City Hall on Wednesday evening. I think we should give Professor Oki an applause. To all in this room and online, I would like to say, as chairman of the Stockholm International Water Institute and Stockholm Water Foundation, that I'm very grateful that you are here to share your passion, your knowledge and experience. And as president of the City Council, I'm proud that the World Water Week takes place once again in the center of our capital, a beauty on the water. So let me say one more time, welcome to Stockholm. So much ahead of us. Let the show begin. Enjoy.
Thank you, Ole. The future we want to build. And of course, this year's agenda and this year's theme, peace and sustainability. It's a very, very noble ambition. But as many of you in the room know, and those of you online, it's not always achieved. Our next speaker will speak to us in words, but also with visuals and with pictures to show us what vulnerability, what scarcity, and what instability looks like. Our next speaker, Paul Hansen, is a photographer with the Swedish newspaper Dagens Nyheter. Paul, welcome on.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here, way out of my comfort zone though. When I was asked to attend, say a few words at this event about water, I thought to myself, water? What do I know about water? Then I went through some scenes and stories I've done through the years. I traveled extensively to war-stricken and famine-stricken places in the world. And I realized how much everything revolves around water without me even realizing it. In my experience, there's usually always enough food and water, even in war and famine-stricken places. But controlling the supply is a very, very powerful weapon. The donated well in the middle of the IDP camp, where water is hijacked by water thieves, charging money. The dynamited dam, the bombed desalination plant, or the rerouted river. Not only is the water the source of life, but also in many places the source of violence and death. I have brought today with me some of these photographs and stories, very short stories. I would like to share them with you. These are Sudanese refugees in Chad who use the help of friends and gravity to get water for the evening meal. When we passed the village, I asked my interpreter about this village, and he said, "Oh, that's nothing. That's an old village. They're permanently internally displaced. This is not news anymore." That is one of the biggest challenges for me or us as journalists, when the news are not news anymore. The immediacy, the short perspective, that is what our business model is built upon. A cow was screaming, and I stopped the car. I walked outside, and there was somebody butchering a cow in the middle of the street. The blood was pooling down into a ditch, and I peered down. It looked like a trench. And I discovered the sole water supply for a block in Kabul, Afghanistan. The Taliban had the city surrounded, and a few months later they marched into the city. Water and sanitation were it's still not very high on their agenda. After many years of conflict and instability, just 42% of the population has access to safe drinking water, and 1/3 of the rural population have access to sanitation facilities. The well in the background used to have a red marking on it, but it's been worn off because it's been so used. The red marking meant that it was an arsenic-poisoned well. More than every 4th death in Bangladesh is due to arsenic poisoning. According to The Lancet, up to 35 million people have died so far. Partially to blame are aid organizations, who in all their well-meaning started an ambitious program drilling wells to provide clean drinking water. Indian medical doctors sounded the alarm in 1983 about the arsenic in the ground, but they were ignored. Approximately 70 million people have been poisoned so far. Wakar Ahmad is 20 years old. He cannot afford the €2 it costs to take a shower at the hotel close by. He has tried to make it from Serbia into the EU 4 times. Every time he says he was violently stopped and robbed by the border police who stripped him of his cash and his cell phone. He's now, as many others, in the humanitarian cul-de-sac in Belgrade in Serbia, and he's going to try again in a couple of weeks after I shot this photograph. The situation here, and in many other places, of course, makes some of the people take drastic measures to escape the misery, the hopelessness, the lies. The week before I got here, 2 Afghan boys tried to kill themselves, and 1 succeeded. These are girls playing happily just outside the camp for internally displaced in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. It's estimated that almost 250,000 people lost their lives after the earthquake. 300,000 were injured and 1.3 million were displaced. Just around the corner from where I took this photograph, a young girl was gang raped a few days earlier. The lack of access to clean drinking water not only creates a hygienic problem for these people, but also a safety issue. Just walking to the toilet or getting water is a real hazard, especially for the young girls. After a long journey we finally made it to South Sudan, me and my reporter. We were wading through waist-deep water when we reached the camp for displaced people in Bargasal. It was run by Doctors Without Borders. I found Aluel Akot, this woman here, sitting on the ground next to a long line of starving people waiting for food. The doctor I talked to, he told me that she probably wouldn't live very long. But when she saw us, she asked for a cigarette. She started chain-smoking our cigarettes and started bragging relentlessly about her son, who was the bodyguard for the chief in the village. In the hut where the most critical cases of starvation were assessed, a 5-year-old girl who weighed as much as my then 11-month-old daughter was being weighed in. It's always such a challenge as a white man, privileged man like myself, well-fed, with a return ticket in my pocket, to do these stories. How do I connect? We are literally a world apart, or a universe apart. So in this particular place, I took out a picture of my little daughter, 11-month-old Emma. And I gave it to the closest woman, who had her starving child in her hand. The ribs were protruding, really bad shape. The woman took the photograph, looked at it, and passed it further into the hut. Everybody started laughing, really loud. So I asked the interpreter what they were saying. Why are they laughing? And he whispered, leaned over to me, and he whispered in my ear, they think she's incredibly ugly and fat. Sharing these small stories with you reminds me of my feelings every time I come home from a trip to a stricken country. I always have very mixed emotions. People sometimes talk about survivor's guilt. I always think about homecoming guilt. I feel grateful, and at the same time I have a sense of privileged guilt. Having a daughter myself, my heart especially goes out to all the vulnerable girls around the world. Having to quit school just to get water for the family, or suffering from assaults just because they're trying to go to the bathroom. So, in conclusion, I just want to thank you all for doing the work you do. Thank you.
Water as a source of life, water as a source of violence. I think those images and those words will stay with us during the week. And maybe Paul's call to action is one that we should listen to, and it's time for us to get out of our comfort zones. We've heard about conflict, we've heard about water insecurity, we've heard about how fragile these environments can leave us. We also now want to talk about cooperation, collaboration, using science to impact foreign policy, and foreign policy objectives to create peace and security. I'm very happy to have the next speakers on my panel. I invite on stage David Mahlobo, Deputy Minister of Water and Sanitation, South Africa. Elina Valtonen, Minister for Foreign Affairs, Government of Finland. And Dan Smith, Director of the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. I'm going to ask you, Dan, to start us off, to ask you a question that begins our panel but also sets the stage for the entire Water Week. You have a very unique vantage point at SIPRI. You have access to data that gives you trends that can look back but also look forward. You have access to conversations that can help you understand the role of water, yesterday, today, and tomorrow. So I ask you a very small question to set us off and to start this World Water Week. Is water a source of conflict or a tool for peace?
Well, it's a very straightforward answer. Yes. You can move on now. If you look at water and its relationship to questions of security and whether people fight or not, there's a number of ways in which it comes up. I mean, first of all, as has been noted already, water can be a tool. in conflict. The poisoning of the well, the destruction of the well, the diversion of the river. Water can also be a tool in another way. Think of the destruction of the Kharkovka Dam in Ukraine by the Russians during the war, or indeed of the Ruhr Valley dams by the British Air Force during the Second World War. So you can use water as a weapon. You can also use the lack of water as a weapon. Controlling who has access to it, ensuring that it's only your allies do, punishing those whom you're opposed to by denial. So water is a tool of conflict. Then also water or access to it as a source of conflict. I mean, in Yemen, for example, in the period before 2015, when the Saudi-led coalition intervened, the government was noting that something like 4/5 of local violent conflicts in Yemen were a result of conflict over land, in which the question that was at stake was which land had the water in it. So it was basically a water conflict. Right? And we see that time and time again. One of the areas that we're studying particularly closely in recent years has been the question of UN peace operations in conflict countries. And so, for example, in Somalia, you see how the UN peace operation, the federal government, need to know what's happening with water, drought or flood, because either way, whether there's too much water or too little, that can be a source of exacerbation of the conflict. And then more broadly, I mean, water is a transmission mechanism for the impact of climate change. And climate change is having a destructive impact on social stability, which is increasing the risk of violent conflict. So water is implicated in all these kinds of ways. But then if you look at the history of divided water resources, you find far more examples of cooperation at community level, at intergovernmental level, at international level, than you do of violent conflict over shared lakes, shared rivers, and so on. One problem to enter there is that because of the impact of climate change, when agreements about the use of rivers are based on water flow, on the volume of water flow, rather than on the share of it, when they're based on the volume, the impact of climate change is making those agreements much more rocky than they were before. If there's less water flowing, then the downstream states or communities are much more at risk. So that was a long version of the... You should have taken the temptation and just moved on when I said yes.
I'm actually going to follow up, actually. So, because you've answered the question, but we can go a little bit further. Because, of course, at CIPRI, you're working with research to create mechanisms to actually be part of the solution, to actually provide the information, because you touched upon it. You said the need to know one way or the other, and that information is powerful. So from your perspective, what can research do to facilitate resolving some of these issues?
Well, first of all, I think that research is good for pointing out risk. One of the thoughts that was mentioned early on is the between the long term and the short term, right? And with no disrespect to politicians sitting on the stage with me, we know that politicians and policy making and policy machinery is very often drawn towards the short term and the urgent at the expense of the long term and the important. And I think that research and also public movements can often be a reminder, kind of whispering in the politicians' ears, or sometimes shouting in their ears, and saying, look, you have to pay attention to the long term here as well. And here's why. Here's what happens when you don't pay attention to the risks. And also, here's what happens, here's the gains when you do pay attention to the risks. I think the second thing is that research is allowing us to understand a little bit more what works. And what works for me, the big answer to that question is not a technical answer. It's much more to do with process. If you don't have local communities engaged in projects and work that affects their well-being and their access to water, probably those projects are not going to be really working very well. If you try to do it just at the local community level, and you haven't got the provincial government or the national government, or where necessary, the international partner and the funding streams, it's also not going to work very well. And A third element, I would say, is a kind of maybe a different take on the word sustainability, which is one of your themes, is you just have to sustain the effort. It's not just about natural sustainability. I mean, I have seen projects and programs in, for example, in the Niger Basin, where cattle corridors were generated by agreement, so the herders could bring their animals through, and the farmers agreed to this as long as it happened in a controlled way. And the result was peaceful relations. And then after 3 years, the funding was over. And it wasn't a very dramatic amount of funding. It was just for a few people who would be able to facilitate the process. But the plug was pulled on the funding, and as a result, the plug was pulled on the program, and all of its benefits were lost. So it was almost like a perfect laboratory experiment. Do this, bring the people together to have a conversation, putting small resources in, and you get more peace. Stop it, and you get more conflict. So I think those are the kinds of things that research can help with.
And I think what you do is provide a great segue to our next speaker to say we have the research, and it's only as useful as the people who operationalize it. The people who take that research and actually make policy, make legislation, and actually act on it in our everyday. Elina, in June, Finland released its foreign security policy, and of course, you have a very clear focus on water in that. Tell us more about that.
Well, in Finland we can count ourselves very lucky because we have plentiful of fresh water everywhere, easily accessible to everybody. But that makes us also very conscious of the fact that it's obviously not the case everywhere in the world, and we can bring in our expertise and also, of course, technology to solve many of the issues. But I think coming to what Dan pointed out, of course. It's a question to us politicians to listen to research, but what we need more is positive examples and really solutions, because effectively I live in a democracy where at the end of the day I do what my people ask me to do, and people need to be conscious of the role that water is playing around the world behind conflict, but also what we really can do. And that's something I really I like to put the challenge out back in that regard. But yes, our white paper, which we came out with this summer on foreign and security policy, concentrates, of course, on the main values that Finnish foreign and security policy is based on, and one of those aspects is the rule of law and, of course, international rules-based order. And I think what comes to water, especially the transboundary aspects of it, it is very much a question of rules, international rules, and respecting those. And I think it's extremely important in these days, especially there are people who do say or do claim that sort of the international rules-based world order is something of the past, and I'm claiming exactly the opposite, despite of the fact that there are countries who even voluntarily break our rules. The vast majority of the countries, and especially of the people of this world, are significant proponents of that system, and we just, as politicians and as everybody, need to be making sure that it holds also in issues concerning water, and especially concerning those.
But then following up, of course, Finland wants to have responsible and equitable water usage. And you have the international water strategy, the Finnish Waterway. What are your core components of that allow you to ensure that outcome?
Yes, we launched the Finnish waterway strategy here in Stockholm, actually, now already 6 years ago, in August 2018. So the strategy brings together 5 ministries dealing with international water issues. And these 5 ministries holistically cover our mandate in international water affairs. And the joint work is coordinated by a special envoy for water based at the foreign ministry. And the goal that the Finnish waterway strives towards is a water-secure world by 2030. So essentially it would contain universal access, of course, and consisting of 3 pillars: the water for sustainable development, water for people, and thirdly, water for peace. The strategy in itself is very concise, like we Finns, it's just 5 pages long, but it's very hardcore in the sense that it emphasizes those issues which are most important. And the word together is probably the key word here as well, bringing different actors of the public sector together with, of course, outstanding companies providing the technology and the expertise. And, well, just wanting to underline that we fully understand that, well, we have the privilege of living in a water-rich country. Finland is not isolated at all from the global water crisis. And, well, half of our water use takes place beyond our borders. And second, we also play a very significant role, or want to play a significant role in peace mediation around the world, and there, of course, water is key.
I think that's really critical. You say together. You mentioned interministerial collaboration, to be on the same page as you operationalize the water strategy, and then everyone speaks the same language to get the job done. I want to come from Finland, like you say, a very water-rich country, to South Africa. And David, I want to ask you. You have, of course, you're experiencing water challenges. You're experiencing drought. You're experiencing multiple stakeholders looking for this resource. How do you, in your capacity and your position in government, avoid conflict and create cooperation in these extreme times of water scarcity?
No, thank you very much. When it comes to South Africa, we have a history, and a very, very sad history, where issues of water and access to water were weaponized as an issue that the apartheid government made a decision that the majority of South Africans must be denied access to water, safe drinking water, but equally they were denied opportunities around the question of water. Even currently, as a country, we've made strides, but we could see the risk. Hence, when you have chosen this theme, it resonates well with us, because when Nelson Mandela spoke about the issue that overcoming poverty is not an act of charity, but it's an act of justice. Many, many people across the world, they don't have water, including that their issues of dignity, they've been taken away, let alone issues of decent sanitation. And the water can remain the biggest issue because populations are growing and so forth. But in our country, when we took over in 1994, we were to restore people's dignity. We made it a law that in our constitution is part of our Bill of Rights, clearly defined that issues of environment are a Bill of Rights, because as water is equivalent to life, whether economically, whether environmental, whether social, including issues of security. And at the very same time, sanitation is dignity. In our own country, we're a water scarce country, and we're a water scarce region. We're about half the global average in terms of rainfall pattern. We are driven by an understanding to say water knows no boundaries, water knows no ideology. We all live downstream. The cooperation that exists amongst us in the SADC region is something that can be emulated. We shared rivers with the Kingdom of Lesotho, Eswatini, Namibia, Botswana, and Zimbabwe. Even now, we're drawing a lot of our surface water from the Kingdom of Lesotho, and we're spending billions of rands to ensure that there is security. We're drawing water from Zimbabwe and so forth. That's what we need to do, because as unlike in other countries, you remember the question of Israel and Lebanon, the question of the Golan Heights. The very same problem we experienced around the question of the Nile River between the three countries, of which the African leaders have been able to deal with that to reduce the tension. And you could see those are the difficulties that are there. But water security is also not about where water will come from. There are these issues of climate change that are causing devastating impact. Many parts of our country, because we're surrounded by seashores, there are many areas where there is increased flooding, the resilience of our infrastructure, and the impact of people. But then there are localized droughts that take over a long period like we experienced in Nelson Mandela Bay, and we're to deal with these particular issues. Therefore, the most important issue is for our people to understand there is no additional drop of water that is going to come from somewhere. That water, that drop that is there that we waste, someone is looking for it. Therefore, to increase our source in terms of the mix, we're exploring more the usage of groundwater in our country, a very, very big component in Africa where there is no infrastructure, but there are risks on groundwater. Because groundwater, because of densification, is starting to be polluted, and issues around the other activities that are happening there. The issues of reuse, and the issues of reclamation, because we are the mining capital of the continent and the impact that is there, and the issues of efficiency. Those are some of the issues that we are dealing with, but we need to be able to start to look ahead of the curve, because the demand, the population in our country is now more than 63 million. And the GDP, the more the GDP grows and address our own issues, the input for water will be very high. Then the issues of efficiency around water, use of technology, advancements that are there by all the sectors, but at the very same time to change the behavior of citizens, especially the consumption rate, because we are actually above the world global average in terms of the number of liters a person uses per day. And we have an example in Cape Town where we're able to reduce that one, but there are still other cities that are actually struggling to come down to about 170 liters per person per day.
But David, I want to actually take you and challenge you a little bit on that, because you've talked about and presented this scenario of what you're doing with a very difficult baseline.
Yes.
And you've also admitted and said and reconfirmed that water is vital for all of us, for humans, for animals, for industry, for multiple competing agendas. You have a Bill of Rights, you have a law that puts very clearly water center stage. How do you operationalize this? How do you actually work to take that law into action?
Well, one of the things that science and engineering and the advances in technology, they are very breathtaking. We should not be experiencing these problems. But in the main, they should be about humanity. They should be about shared aspiration where we all want to live in peace, want to have a better world that we can live on for the next generation. That is what guides us in terms of our approach in dealing with some of these particular issues. Therefore, the issues of leaving citizens behind is not sustainable. Sustainability is that citizens, they must be placed at the center of the decisions, the institutions we create, and the choices that we have to make. As politicians, we must not impose, because these citizens, they've been living there with indigenous knowledges, the advancements on artificial intelligence and others. That's what we need to look at. But in our own country, various sectors are competing. In the main, agriculture is taking a lot of water. And we need to have a discussion with agriculture to say they can be able to produce more, but using less water in terms of technologies that are actually there, because we will need to have food security. There is that particular nexus. In our own country, we look at the issues that were not energy secure. In the main, in terms of fuel, we're actually an oil importing country. We just have our own refineries and the amount of water that we need to use. Even the technologies that we use around energy, even when we look at in terms of how many liters we can be able to produce 1 megawatt of electricity from coal. Therefore, movement into green and clean energies is one of the most important aspects that we need to do. Then mining will always be there, as I was saying. We want the mines to use less. We know the issues of the cooling system, the impact on the groundwater that is there. We are insisting on them that they have to take their liability now around the issues of the licensing instrument, that if you pollute that water, the polluter pays principle is becoming one of the issues. Invest in technology around water reclamation, recycling. You produce water of a very high quality standards. That's what they are doing, because we don't want to pass this bill or premium to the next generation. But equally so, there are these issues around local government, which is the weakest link. the manner in which they manage water in terms of their networks, the issues of losses that are happening within our own systems, including issues of criminality where some people are impacting on the infrastructure. Those are some of the issues that we wanted to be able to look at. But the sustainability of the sector also lies on the question of the financing model. The ability that those that are unable to pay, that are poor, they will have to take responsibility that in as much as there's a social protection, but those who can be able to pay, there's a proper system around financial investment and recovery and those developmental models. And then the last point, we want to be having resilient cities. Resilient cities, because if we don't do that, even the engineers that some of them are sitting here and the planners today, they are modeling under the current condition and the variables are changing. They will never have to be the same because of the short-term span in which climate change is varying from one angle to the next, and therefore the issues of adaptability. Those are some of the issues. Therefore, networking and collaborating will be able to secure our future.
I wanted to ask Dan a very, very short question, Dan, because we've heard now from two countries, very different countries, very different approaches, and of course, working with water. From your perspective, taking a step back, getting context and scale. You've heard David, you've heard Alina. When it comes to governance, and you've heard David actually say we have to get ahead of the curve to challenge maybe a little bit the short term versus long term in terms of where politicians stand, what they need to take in with them as they put these operations on the ground. What are the trends you're seeing today when it comes to water and conflict and cooperation? What are the key takeaways that you have from that?
So the big picture, unfortunately, is that the international security horizon, both at the kind of the global level and in multiple local levels, is deteriorating. Right. The second thing to say is that when we talk about the role of water in conflict or the role of climate change in conflict, this is being very, very researcher-oriented, right? I've never come across a violent conflict that was caused by one thing. So what can governments and politicians and international organizations do is to work on governance and on regulation. That seems to me to be the area to go in on. Yes, of course, you can have all sorts of targets about other things. But if there were clearer regulations and governance that involved people in the decisions about their own future, if these could be integrated with some kind of a red thread that met the needs of each locality, if you had more education in the broadest sense so that more people were involved in discussing and understanding their problems, if actually some of the experts would come to those areas and listen to people with a little bit of humility as well, not just having the solution in their kit bag or in their software, but actually listening to what people say. All of these things would get us steps towards a better future. But there is unfortunately no single answer, no short answer to that, because it varies from place to place. So you have to respect and respond to the context, even if you're operating from general principles.
And one word that you haven't mentioned that I want to bring to Alina as the final question of today's panel is multilateralism in terms of cooperation and collaboration. Last year, the United Nations held a historic water conference, 50 years after its first. The United Nations, of course, is a metaphor, is a symbol for hope and multilateralism. In your opinion, and for the final words on this panel, what is the role of the UN when it comes to water?
Well, it's massive, and of the entire multilateral international world order. So this comes conveniently to close where I started, basically with my intervention. So we are extremely pleased to see the positive developments at the global water governance level, and the United Nations Water Conference in March 23 and the recently launched system-wide strategy for water and sanitation are both great steps in the right direction, and we are looking forward to the next UN water conferences. Senegal and United Arab Emirates can count on our support in the preparations for 26, as much as Tajikistan in the preparations towards the 28 water conference. And also I want to highlight that Finland is running for the Security Council for the years 29-30. So this will be also very much our topic. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So everyone's heard, cooperation really has a lot of steps to take. But with leadership taking the right decisions, we're on the right runway. Elina, David, Dan, thank you so much. Please join me in giving them a warm round of applause. Thank you. Thank you. Dialogue, best practice, and knowledge. You've heard those words today in terms of how we can reach more effective water stewardship. We have today on our panel next 2 experts to discuss how we can do this best by having inclusive dialogue. I welcome to the stage Anna Edmondson, board member of Saminora, and Phil Duncan, professor at the University of Canberra. Now, Phil, before we begin, you told me you have a gift, Anna, that has been brought from home and blessed by the elders in your community. Please.
Yeah, well, I want to start out with an acknowledgement of country. It's customary. So I say Yarmaninda, Phil Naya, Gomeroi Māori. That's hello. My name's Phil, and I'm a very proud Gomeroi man, Kamilaroi. I want to pay respects to the Sami people, the traditional people's country that we meet on today, on the unceded lands. And while we will walk softly and respect country and people, we will seize every opportunity to amplify the voices of Indigenous people in this forum, to have our voices and our knowledge and our perspectives integrated into the future management and security of water in this country. And I just want to say, thank you. Anna, this opportunity, I am my mother's son. We are a matrilineal society where I come from. I reached out to my mum and the old women and told them what we'd do and the relationship that you and I forged 3 years ago. And I want to give you 2 things. I want to give you a dilly bag with the artwork of our women to put all your knowledge and harvest as much other knowledge to keep in your cultural toolbox, because you are a future leader in the water society.
Thank you, Phil.
This is one of our traditional women's artefacts. It is a hunting and gathering tool. It is also a weapon for our women to defend themselves while out harvesting food for family and community. And this is really hard gidgee wood. And it's been blessed in my river, the Guida. And the old women, please use this to harvest knowledge, but also to protect yourselves from those that may come near you.
Thank you. That's such an honour. And I'm getting a bit emotional because we're all the same sisters and brothers from all over the world. So thank you for that, Phil.
I think we all are in the best way. Thank you. And Anna actually wanted to follow up from what Phil says about Indigenous knowledge. Now, of course, we've heard and we talk about how the communities are willing to share knowledge. You have long experience in best practice. You have ways in which we can learn collective action, community practice. But understandably, you also want recognition at the leadership level and decision making for sharing this knowledge. What do you want to tell us in the room today and online of how we can work with you to create this recognition?
I think the first and most important thing that I want you guys to take with you today is to listen. Listen to our knowledge about the lands and waters, because it is known that Indigenous people around the world are the ones actually protecting a majority of our ecosystems. We are the knowledge holders of our lands and waters, and we usually have names for every lake, maya, and river, and we we know how to take care of it since we have done it for time unknown. The second part is that I want you to respect what we have to say. I experience that we often are invited to consultations and meetings, and I think it's the same all over the world, where companies or organizations ask for our advice. We come with our input, and then they might go against our advice anyway with the thought that they now have consulted us, and keep working with that no matter the consequences. I also think that we, both as an Indigenous representative and a youth representative, are expected to participate in these meetings and just be thankful to be invited, even if we don't get paid or any compensation, because these questions are about the existence of our future and our people. This is even though other parties get paid for every hour of work they put down. So the advice I would give is to listen, respect, and then act together.
I want to take that and give it to Phil. Listen, respect, act. Now, you've also been part of course, how vital this information is, this knowledge base, and also the challenges that we might encounter, you might encounter, when bringing Indigenous representatives to the decision-making table. Anna put it very well, representation is key. How do you manage that?
I believe that the decision makers are going to come sit on country with us. Come with a wondering mind. Leave your preconceived positions at the door when you leave your office or your home. As an Aboriginal man, a Kamilaroi man, in Australia, we've existed on the driest inhabited continent on this planet. And our population has grown because we have this symbiotic relationship with country and its resources that have sustained us since time immemorial. That knowledge has been handed down transgenerationally. I believe that we are the missing ingredient of knowledge in water planning and management into the future. While you think about money, we think about quality of life, longevity of life, quality cultural way of life. And we are a people globally, Indigenous people, a people of a spirit of generosity. We keep giving. Where's the reciprocity? We need to calm and down, seize the moment, seize this point in time to look at how we can integrate that knowledge. It is the missing piece, and not can be, it is. You know, in my country, in the Murray-Darling Basin, I live in the rural heartbeat of it. Our native fish populations that we have totemic values and relationships with are down to less than 10% since first contact. Water infrastructure and the extraction and the rate of extraction and the amount of extraction has impacted on our arteries, you call rivers, and our veins that you call anabranches. We want to play our role and exercise our cultural responsibilities and obligation to care for country. We need you to unlock the external locus of control where our lives are governed by the decisions others make, and have us enter the room, sit at the table, the same chairs, the same tables, but not have the crumbs off the table. We need you to embrace us and embrace our knowledge. Not tomorrow. We need to start walking and talking and sharing the load and sharing the journey today.
Listen, respect, reciprocity for representation. Thank you both so much for being with us today to share that, and we take that with us. Anna will stay with us on stage. Our second panel today is to talk about representation, talking about representation. We can't talk about water stewardship and the way forward without taking into account 16% of the world's population, and that's today's youth. To help us put this into perspective, we have Anna Edmondson with us, and I'm calling on stage Disa Crow-Chief from the Black Youth Foundation. Anna, you're on the board of Saminora. You're an expert, you're a leader, you're representing youth. You touched upon it in your earlier comments as well when it comes to representation. But what is important today to keep in mind when it comes to the youth vote, to the youth voice?
I think that Indigenous youth are often expected to kind of defend our thoughts and how we think. Like if we're not able to have certain projects on our lands because it affect us, we don't have the solutions to climate change, or we don't have the solutions to all the world problems. And I think that's important to keep in mind. We are not expert on all subjects, but many of you guys are, and we need to work together. But we are explaining how your choices and your actions affect us and our nature as we know it. So to include youth more, I would advise to firstly not expect that we have solution to all the world's problems. And as I previously said, and as Phil also said, to listen, respect, reciprocity, and act together.
I'm going to come to you, Disa, because we spoke a little bit before we were on stage right now. And to take what Anna is saying, you talked about how you can create meaningful dialogue. How do you actually work with very different groups of stakeholders? And you said something very important that I wanted to touch upon, is that we need to create safe spaces. We need to say it's okay to not be okay, to open the door for communication. From your perspective, what are the key kind of elements of this meaningful dialogue that we need to now foster?
It's important in my perspective and in my experience and where I come from, which is Siksika, which is one of 4 tribes that make up the Blackfoot Confederacy, and today I'm here representing the Blackfoot Youth Water Council. It's important to remember why we do what we're doing. It's very easy to get lost in the busyness of our own schedules and our own lives that we forget to humanize our work. And part of that is acknowledging that just as important as it is to learn, it's important to also unlearn in order to learn. It's a good sign of intelligence, and we can all, it's a part of decolonization that we can all do together. Having uncomfortable conversations in safe spaces is very important as well. I always say that our generation is the first generations to challenge the systems that we were grown up in, because our parents were part of the generation that was mainly in survival mode. So we are now learning how to heal and how to apply that in the work that we do. But those aspects of humanness are something that is very important and should be at the forefront, because having a solid foundation creates healthy, sustainable relationships within our communities, with each other, and that can't be something that is second guessed or second thought of, because human connection is at the root of all of our cultures as Indigenous people. We ask each other when we meet, like, who are you and who are your parents? Like, who are you and where are you from? We don't necessarily point titles as being the most important of someone's worth, because every single person in this room has something to offer. Every single person in here is allowed to learn as you go. So be patient and kind with yourself, and listen to the environment, because the environment shouldn't be owned. But unfortunately, we live in a world where the environment is looked at as our natural resources. But in my community, those are our relatives. Everything we know, everything we are, has come from the environment around us, from listening to the environment and connecting to it. And yeah, that's like what I like to focus on.
I think what you've said, humanness, connectedness, absolutely.
Thank you.
I want to ask you both for one sentence to the audience today, in the room, online. What can we do? What can we do to be responsible in this way?
Really?
Anna, I'll start with you.
Oh, in one sentence, I don't know if I can
One
do
sentence.
that. Yeah,
One word.
I'm not sure. Just as I said before, listen, respect, and act, and work together with us. And don't. I also think it's important to not create these borders that are actually made. We need to work together and take away those borders.
Really quickly, what I want to leave with everyone is that youth are not the future, youth are the present and are capable of contributing now and are doing such beautiful work in our communities. Really quickly, I want all the Indigenous youth in the room to stand up, if you're not standing already. All the Indigenous youth delegates. Okay, so these individuals that are standing right now are who you should be approaching, involving in your conversation, and investing. Because in policy and mentorship are super, super important. They deserve to be at every table and are capable of being at every table. And I'm really proud of every single one of you for being here.
Anna, Disa, thank you so much. And I think our takeaway, the youth is not tomorrow, it's today. So we start today. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
We have talked about conflict. We have talked about cooperation. We have talked about inclusion, and we have talked about diversity. We have one bridge left to build, and that is water as a connector for sustainable development, for international relations, and for collaboration. To talk to us about this, we are so happy to have with us Jakob Granit, the Director General of the Stockholm International Development Corporation Agency. Swedish International.
Thank you, Artie. And Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to be part of the opening of this year's Stockholm World Water Week with the theme, Bridging Borders, Water for a Peaceful and Sustainable Future. What a wonderful and rich theme, as we have heard. Lake Mälaren, outside this venue, provides clean drinking water for 2 million people, navigation, recreation, and many other ecosystem services. The lake watershed is managed by 6 county administrations and many municipalities. Lake Mälaren is connected to the Baltic Sea basin with its 14 riparian countries. 8 of them are coastal states. Over 80 million people depend for their livelihoods on the fresh and marine water resources in the Baltic Sea basin. The Baltic Sea has been considered one of the most polluted seas in the world. It still suffers from poor water quality, with runoff from nutrients leading to eutrophication and algae blooms, and from many hazard substances threatening the marine life. But this situation has also led to cooperation between states, even during the height of the Cold War. The coastal states did already in the early 1980s come together to find solutions to the deteriorating state of the water resources with the support of many international institutions. It was recognized that a key part of the solution to the environmental problems in the Baltic Sea were connected to poor freshwater management upstream the sea itself. All basin states have invested in eradicating point source pollution and its source in the rivers and lakes, improved agriculture practices, and participating in joint activities to protect the marine environment. Today, most riparian states in the Baltic Sea basin are EU members and comply with common environmental legislation to contribute to shared EU goals. Collective action has become formalized. Ladies and gentlemen, clean water is not something that we can take for granted. At a global scale, we are moving towards a more water-insecure future, as pressures on freshwater ecosystems globally is projected to increase by more than 40% by 2050. This includes pressures, as we heard, from climate change that alter the water cycle. More irregular rainfall patterns and increased frequency of droughts and floods and rising sea levels are some of those impacts. Water management challenges can take many forms depending on geographic, political, and economic conditions. What have we learned over the past decades on how water can bridge borders at different scales? First of all, we have learned that water resource management is a public good. However, the supply of this public good is in very short supply, which in turn threatens the water-dependent ecosystems and the production of clean energy, agriculture production, water for industry, and water for households. Financing for public goods that benefit all are difficult to put in place. Secondly, political will is fundamental in the management of public goods. A focus on outcomes and benefits from water management can be an incentive for increased investment into it. Water resource management is not for free, but the returns from the investment is significant. This will involve political decision-making and trade-offs. Innovative financing models, drawing on the skills, innovation capacity, and financial resources of the private sector should be further explored. Finally, trust amongst the stakeholders, as we heard here today, sharing water resources need to be built and maintained. And this will take significant investments into joint institutions and knowledge generation. The engagement of stakeholders spanning from public sector institutions to academia, civil society, and the private sector in different partnerships depend on context. A clear focus on the most poor and vulnerable in society is critical. Good water governance depends on the respect of international law, the trust in international institutions, and democratic values. Ladies and gentlemen, my initial remarks on collaboration amongst the Baltic Sea basin countries demonstrate that collaboration is possible if there's a clear focus on the outcomes from collaboration and how all states can benefit from them. By recognizing the public good character of the water resource from the source to sea, the countries came together to manage this resource in a continuum. This was possible through political will and trust building. It is through cooperation that we can see transformative breakthroughs, form new alliances, and harness the potential in synergies and partnerships. The World Water Week provides since 1991 a meeting place for a growing community of engaged actors to exchange ideas on how to build future resilient and inclusive societies. I wish you all a very rewarding conference, and thank you and welcome to Stockholm. Thanks.
Thank you very much. My main takeaway, cooperation can lead to transformative outcomes, and that's what we're here to talk about today during this week. Our opening ceremony is coming to a close, but before we go any further, we have someone in the floor to talk to us. Henk. Many of you know Henk, he's a familiar face. Director of the Global Commission on the Economics of Water and a member of the Scientific Program Committee, which is critical to advising the World Water Week. Henk, over to you.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure and an honor to shed light in the context of what we just heard, the importance of dialogue, best practice, and knowledge, creating a safe space to listen, to ask questions, to really mean that you ask a question and that listening is genuine, and that it comes from the heart, not only from the mind. A safe space where that dialogue can progress into action, that we actually not stay here within Stockholm World Water Week, but that we have a 24/7 everyday practice informed by that. We know, and that's also messaged, not so much in the opening ceremony, but that is why I'm here, that CIWI, the World Water Week, and the prize are undergoing organizational changes, and that those organizational changes will have impact, of course, on the future of what's happening here. And because of that, and on behalf of the Friends of CIWI and World Water Week, I organize lunch gatherings from 1 to 1:50 on the 5th floor to get your input on that future. Because from Stockholm to the world, and hopefully back again, there's something to explore. And we already had 2 lunches, and I have the pleasure to share some insights. One of them is about the value. This is really the value of how these 3 parts stick together. A World Water Week as a converging space, but also a space like a volcano, from Stockholm back to the world, to take that listening, that trust building, that engagement, those partnerships further. Second, CIWI as an institute to organize that dialogue 24/7 beyond the week, because after 1 week, we still have 51 weeks left. And yes, that is true. And in those 51 weeks to ensure that next year coming back to Stockholm actually has meaningful progress, and that what happened here is not only anchored in policy dialogues, but also on the ground in community. That is where, and on UN tables and negotiations, and the policies and practices and governance discussions, including finance, is key. And the staff of CIWI and World Water Week as a whole are ensuring that that is happening 24/7, 365 days a year. So when you land here, there's real progress, because your conversations, your listening, your trust building found a space and a place somewhere else. So it's not only the safe space here, it's securing that safe space elsewhere. And then the prize. You could say the prize puts a spotlight on excellence. Luckily, we have 2 prizes, also to ensure that intergenerational aspect. But the prize also put a spotlight on responsibility, because every prize winner carries a weight of what came before her or him and what will come after. So translating that knowledge and capacity, but also that honor of a prize forward. That's the value. The second is the urgency. We heard about it, everybody talked about it. The water crisis in many dimensions, blue and green, transpiration, evaporation, too much, too little, polluted, climate, biodiversity, land. We know all about it, but we lack often the action, the scalability. What's happening from CIWI to the world is literally about the third aspect that was mentioned, impact. Impact on the ground, affecting lives and livelihoods of billions of people around the world. That is you as a community, and that is CIWI as an institute, ensuring in that partnership that that impact not only happens, but also sees scales, sees recognition in policy and regulation, and an opportunity for replication. And then 4, momentum. You already mentioned 2023, the UN Water Conference. I was happy to lead that together with my colleague Sultan Rahimzoda from Tajikistan. The first opportunity the world come together in New York after 46 years. With the UAE in Senegal, we have a next opportunity in 2026, and Tajikistan again in 2028. 2026 is also the moment where the G7 that launched the Water Initiative will be led by France. And France actually started a One Water Summit that will now be combined with the UNCCD, the Desertification COP, one of the 3 Rio conventions. And the G20 will be hosted by the presidency by the USA. Hopefully Kamala Harris is then the president, because she brought water to the White House. Yeah. From her California role, she brought water to the White House with the first water security strategy that she launched from the steps of the White House into the world. So before you know it, 2026 is also that converging moment. From now to 2026, we need this capacity and beyond. The momentum is now. We can really capitalize on that. And then last, I wish I could ask that, but so I do. Can you all stand? It's amazing that you do it. Thank you. I want a big hand of applause for the people at CIWI that going through these transitions, where there is, of course, a lot of uncertainty and hardship that is often very personal and impactful, you've noticed nothing. This World Water Week, again, is better than any Water Week before, and that is always the case. This Water Week, again, is that conversion of a safe space, a dialogue that builds trust, and really has the capacity to radiate across the world. This World Water Week is there thanks to them. A big hand of applause. Thank you. Tomorrow at 1 p.m., 5th floor, the balcony, another dialogue on the future of water from Stockholm to the world and back again.
Thank you, Henk. And we're now at that time, at the end of this hour, on center stage, where we come to the last part of our opening ceremony. I'd like to request Suzanne and Andreas to join me on stage. You've heard a lot in this last hour. You've heard many voices talking about many things, many emotions. What are your key takeaways for the week ahead?
Well, what strikes me, as we mentioned earlier, is the diversity. World Water Week is really the place for different perspectives, contrasting idea, and complementing experiences. And this year, there doesn't seem to be any different. I really look forward to following the conversations throughout the week.
I agree with you, Susanne, and it's quite an honor to stand in front of such, I'm going to say, powerful movement, because that's what it is. All of you have experiences to share, experiences that you must share for us to really make a change. Remember, though, what Anna mentioned earlier, to listen during the week. Listen to each other, listen to everyone, listen particularly to those who have different thoughts, opinions, ideas, and experiences, because only then can we truly start bridging borders. So with that, Susanne?
With that, we declare World Water Week 2024 officially open. Have a great week.
Have a wonderful time. Thank you.
I'm waiting for it.
Yeah.